This is a really good platform to be on, where we are performers and there's spaces. I mean, it's a good opportunity for us to have a conversation and hopefully trigger something would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The last time, Maya, you and I had a long conversation, it was when I was working with Gati on this project mapping performance spaces in Delhi. So it was, I was interviewing you regarding sort of what artists' needs and what, how they're met or not met by spaces.
Fascinating. Just to kind of get a sense, I think, kind of as Maya has mentioned, is it okay if I call you Maya, by the way, or would you prefer Ms. Rao? Or...
You're not allowed to call me anything else.
Okay. So as you kind of mentioned, we're hoping that we'll come up with some sort of insight in terms of possible way forwards. Is kind of that the, I think from your email, Siddharth, the sense that I got was you're trying to get sort of collate various responses to the pandemic and various people's, and just sort of have that out there, and then maybe the idea is that we can have some sort of directions in terms of how to go forward, because I think at some level we're all quite foxed about what that way forward could look like. I guess I'll give a little bit of context, and then in terms of what the aspiration is right now, it's very much unclear, and I'm still very much in the process of formulating it. But I guess I'll say a few words about why we started it. And it's been a little over 7 years now, and then what the last year and a half has looked like. But basically, we started Shoonya in 2014 in memory of my brother who passed away in 2010. It was set up as a center for art and somatic practices. It kind of started with, inspired by my brother's passion for self-discovery, essentially, is kind of where it started out. But we felt that art and somatic practices are wonderful channels or platforms to further that journey. And then, of course, being longtime Bangalore residents, we felt this was some way that we could help Bangalore's art and culture infrastructure in our own little way, do whatever we can to help keep up with the financial and technological growth that the city has witnessed over the last 20 years or so. That was the initial impetus for starting. And then, of course, it grew very organically. There isn't a very strong, clear artistic direction. So it ended up being informed a lot by the arts community in Bangalore. And it really was a platform that we were happy to see that artists kind of made it their own and sort of made whatever they could out of it. My family basically helped set up the space, and the hope was that in time we would find a way to kind of operationally break even. Up until a year and a half ago, we were getting there. I wouldn't say we were there, but between the shows and the workshops and the rentals that came in, we were getting there. We'd have some good months, not so good months. Then, of course, March 2020, everything kind of shut down, and it's been a huge challenge since. Obviously, there have been no performances, no workshops. I mean, we were faced with the choice of should we try and take things online or not? At the time, unfortunately, I had kind of had to take the decision that it's best that we wait this out, because it's a totally different ball game to move. We didn't have the resources to do a good job of that. So unfortunately, I had to sort of take the painful call of reducing the team size and really going into hibernation mode, basically. So over the last year and a half, it's been a slightly painful process in terms of, and so to your question of how did you survive the pandemic, I don't think we've survived in the Shoonya that it was up until March 2020 has not survived and is not there in the same way today. That said, the question is what we're not dead, and there are still people who use the space for rehearsals, and the hope is that we will find the next avatar. What that avatar will look like is still very much being figured out.
So you mentioned that it is being used for rehearsal. Very fascinating, because in one of our earlier conversations, Elon was participating, and he talked about how one community theater there opened up for artists to just come and use the space without expecting any output and any.
Yeah.
Brings us to this need for the creative space, of being in that creative space. And with that, probably I'll go to Maya. How has it been for you in terms of this need for space? I mean, you have really adapted. I mean, you have been pushing the boundaries for long. uh, I wouldn't say that the pandemic hasn't really impacted your performance, because that would not be the truth, because you have taken on completely different forms. A lot of graphic and animation has come. There's been narration, which you're doing still, images, narratives. So some wonderful work coming out. But what about this need for the space of creation?
Yeah, I want to first respond to something that Thommen was saying so that we can put it out there and if people want to respond to it. Uh, I'm getting the feeling, not because I've spent long hours thinking about it, but it's when you've done 1.5 years of pandemic and you're just kind of looking back at those months and the kind of changes that are coming over you, and it's something changing in you, something in the way that the change that in the way that you see all kinds of things. What is performance? What is a stage? What's an audience? What's that divide between life and art? What's the divide between street performance and regular auditorium performance? I have a feeling all these terms have now they are all up for grabs. And I want to just place this here, that we now, I think, can look forward to times where we are shifting online, offline, and by offline, I mean the real. Um, so we are quick change artists. And it's not just the divide between offline and online, that sometimes I've got to be ready to be on a reel, on the street, or on a stage, or in somebody's living room for real. And at other times, when the lockdown is heavy and the sword is on my head, then I have to come and sit before a screen. No, I think we've got to, it's pushing us and it's telling us, um, make both the spaces come together in your imagination. For instance, I'd like to be able to throw out to Thommen, what about looking at Shoonya or whatever physical space as a space where we as artists enter, which means all kinds of artists and maybe even, I don't know, sociologists, architects. And we come in there with a frame of mind that is prepared for both offline and online. So they could be that we are preparing ourselves as artists. We come together in threes and fours, and your space is very big. And that if we were to, for instance, on a particular day, an 8-hour day, we come in, a group of people come in with the express purpose of enhancing our skills, if you like, our understanding of what it is to work online. Around me, it could be a theme, it could be food, and we come together simply experimenting. Some people who are technologically savvy, they are also in that room, and we are experimenting as artists with how we work online as artists in your space, which we can't do when we are at home, because home is a different, we are then in a professional space and we come together as professionals and we have that background. We've all for years come to your kinds of spaces with a different yeah, a focus and a frame of mind. And the things that we then work on there with the focus being on online, but as performers, because we are improvising. I hope I'm making sense, because I'm just improvising this as I go along. That what we are experimenting with there about becoming a good online artists, some of it is going to become material that is ready for taking into the real world when spaces open up and we are ready to get in audiences and the lockdown is partially lifting. But what I mean is, let's start thinking about, you see, the word performance has changed. I feel very live. I know it's not theater. I know it's not a real audience. a live audience and a live performer. But in many other ways, I've been feeling very live. And that continuum between life, art, post performance, and the trigger into the next kind of possible performance, the online world has made it possible for me. So if I post a tiny 2-minute comedy sequence or something that I've quickly rustled up, this is the wonderful thing now, you don't have to be an expert at anything. Nothing. Siddharth and I will jam for 10 minutes. He will say something architectural, or he'll bring a model of a tiny house or something. And because of this wonderful frame of the computer, everything gets so focused. And me as a performer, actor, and I'm sure Manjari as well, if she's sitting in another box there, and we've got a little box where Siddharth has set up a space, we will start improvising. And those same the triggers of improvisation that got us into online, I'm sure soon after it, if we make some notes, we will be taking it into our real performances. And let's be ready to go from the real to back online. And can then people like Thommen and us and many other different kinds of people set up a kind of very, if you like, not a vague, but a loose calendar where we are enhancing our whatever it takes, our I don't like the word skills, I hate it, our possibilities, our possibilities right through the year. And we have a rough plan that we'll move from this to that, and there's no great outcome. Thank God one doesn't have to rehearse for 2 months and become damn good at that performance and then get on stage. No, this is a time of improvising and of triggering. I post a little 2-minute piece of comedy. I am getting 100 responses just like that. Arey Maya, this Paru now next, what is she going to do? Arey, why don't you get her to go to Gwalior? Or, I keep getting, people are giving me ideas. And then that brings me right back to my next little episode. Or then I've now realized that I can post maybe 2 pictures with some narration, some song, some animation. It works as a trigger. Somebody else will pick it up and build on it, and I will watch it. It'll trigger. And so there's a kind of continuum that we can be setting up, which means that again, we've got to give up that notion of एक performance देखने आ गए, we watch the performance, then we all go home, we become non-audience, we become people, and we go. So oh, I just feel we are living in times that are challenging us to chuck a lot of words and redefine them as we go along. Hit the road running. I don't know. I get very excited at this, so sometimes I don't make sense in
No,
what I'm saying.
it makes a lot of sense. I draw two things from here. One, of course, you're talking about a community. And you refer to community in two ways. One is when you're creating these little improvisations and people responding and reacting and it feeding back into your creative process. The other is where you're suggesting to Thommen that Shoonya can be a space where people from diverse backgrounds can come and improvise in any which way that befits them or they find the possibilities for. I'll park the question of this community aside for the time being. I will just hold on to the other thing of performance no more being a reaction to कि क्या आपको space मिला या lockdown हो गया. So you don't react, but rather you become responsive to the opportunities and bring it into your own, if you can call it conceptualization or you can call it real feeling of what is it that you want to create. And this question I'll take to Manjari now about this process of creation. You soak in improvisation. That's the way you work. What do you feel when Maya talks so excitedly about these new opportunities emerging?
Sure, I absolutely agree that all of these definitions for all of these audience, performer, etc., has totally changed, because in the format in which now we're experiencing, I hate the word that's going around now, this consuming content. And I would just like to say my work is not content, and please don't consume it. there is still an aspect of experiencing it. It is changed, and I think it's also this thing of what is digital theatre. Because in the beginning of the lockdown, a lot of productions that were already underway had to be stalled midway and stuff like that. And a lot of people very generously came out with documentation of their previous performances. So people really got things out of the archive and put it on the internet and very generously shared, often free of cost. Then there was a second stage of sort of the response to what digital theatre meant, which was very interesting. I would probably think of Maya's work in sort of that category of genre. So it is interesting to look at sort of this contrast, and people are still working on productions wherein it's entirely pre-recorded and it's just screened at a particular time. So I think, yes, I completely agree with Maya on what this format has thrown in. Again, the work that Maya has been making, which is sort of like a short format response to things, which is very immediate. Both of the format and the content of her work has been a very immediate response to what's happening around us. And therefore, this sort of sense of a constant back and forth with her audience. There is also another question, which is about what now, which is linked to what Maya was perhaps addressing to Thommen. Now grappling with having gone through this reality of the pandemic for a year and a half, how do we sort of assimilate this knowledge of having improvised within this new context? And when we move back into live theatre, it cannot be how we used to do it before, because we're still grappling with that. Oh, we're opening up. Oh, we're going back into lockdown, and then we're opening up again. So this, I think the key word here that Maya used, which was improvisation, has to constantly be alive. I think the meaning of these words has been changing, and very rightly so. People have been questioning it. I don't think we need to arrive at one answer of what is live and what is not. But it's interesting, these sort of.
The other question, I'll bring it to you, Thommen, about this idea of community. Of course, it is, let's say, a romantic idea. Of course, it has the promise of bringing something new. But as an entrepreneur who's running a place, what value do you see in this this idea that Maya is proposing, that people from diverse backgrounds, somebody doesn't even have experience in performance, maybe he or she is tech savvy, they all come into this space and they create a kind of a calendar for, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year or so, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of improvise and create something.
I mean, definitely, I think so. It's a wonderful idea. Community and Shoonya, or a space being a platform for community to sort of come together, is definitely a big part of that whole process. And that is something that Shoonya was very proud of and has been very proud of about the way we've done things, is that we've been very conducive to the formation of community. Really amazed that I really appreciate, Maya, you responded to this situation with the sort of optimism and the energy, and it's really wonderful to see that. I think for me personally and for Shoonya, it has been a slightly different experience where it was a little bit more of a body blow that kind of the wind out of our sails. I think economically, I think that was one of the big challenges of this. When early on, we had a sense it wasn't going to be a 2-month, 3-month thing that we'd have to tide over. It's going to possibly be much longer. And so in that sense, our ability to really think creatively and adapt to sort of transfer the same values that we were able to hold in the physical space into an online world was limited. I mean, at some level, it should be people like me who are thinking like you in these terms, and how do we do this? Because that's what we've been doing as a physical space. What that looks like in the online world, or in the current world where this coming together is more challenging, I must confess I have not been able to get so far. And so in that sense, I really do appreciate your thoughts around this. Of course, there's always the question of, okay, but I mean, how do we do that? And at some level, I guess, Siddharth, what you're doing with these conversations is an example and model of that. Right? You just send out a bunch of emails and get responses and schedule it, and it happens. But I think there's definitely a lot of value in getting those processes started. And as Maya has mentioned, even when it does come to, hopefully sooner than later, returning to a more physical world, it's still going to be very changed. And having those conversations now itself is powerful and important. So yeah, I think it's wonderful.
Can I ask you a question, Siddharth?
Yeah.
What is your response? Because you are looking to me like someone who likes to organize around people and ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see yourself and where you're coming from, and given the times we are living in, and how to push ahead and create things afresh for ourselves? How do you see your role, let's say, in this mixed group of people in a Shoonya kind of space? What would be your role?
At one end, so what I'm doing right now is a completely single person initiative. And it's taken me, let's say, 14 years to arrive at this understanding that I can't collaborate with the word go. I have too many reservations, so on and so forth. And in a way, I like this. So the way I am, the pandemic in a way has helped me be what I am. I'm not under any social obligation, any professional obligation. And I love that thing. Having said that, my practices are also very embodied. I discourage students from using software because I want them to understand what body is, how they are inhabiting and displacing space, what light is, what texture is, what gravity is. Software takes all these away and they can do any kind of monkey business that they want. Fair enough. There's no problem in doing monkey business, but that's not should be ending up doing. But when the pandemic hit, I couldn't thank my stars that the students knew some software to get through the semester, right? And the pandemic also took away the contract that I had. It didn't get renewed. So for a few months, fortunately, I didn't have to think about teaching online because it was a counterpoint to how I approach things. But of course, you need to move on. So coincidentally, the opportunity arose with my alma mater and I started teaching there. And somewhere in the middle of the term, we were told of a gazette notification from Government of India, which says that architecture cannot be taught online. And that felt like a slap on my face. And I was like, what have I been doing all these months? Who is this sitting and deciding what I can do and what I cannot do? Or am I not trying? Do you not see the sincerity in my efforts? A lot of those questions happened. And I think I'm doing what in a way you are doing for performance. I've been trying to do with my engagements, teaching online and trying to compensate. So the social space is something else. We are working at a fraction of our capacities. Everything has been reduced to sight and spoken language or textual language. You can't even do silences have no space in this platform. But we are trying to kind of tide over that, see to it that students work in groups and the social condition is still there. But what has been troubling me, and when this question actually arose of performance space, I was just wondering, what does it feel to be told that what you do, what your essential calling is not essential to the society? You know, for instance, if I were to, every time the lockdown opens up, you have the Golgappa wala or whoever on the street, and people are just crowding around, and I'm wondering, why are people doing this? Of course, I'm also on the street because I have to go get some essentials, but people are standing around and having Golgappa, and that is a very strange kind of a paradox that you can't resolve. That Golgappa wala has to survive. So even if people around are crowding and they're not bothered about the pandemic and they're having fun, so you're kind of wondering over here. And then this brings me back to Thommen, where multiplexes or theater places are not allowed to operate because for what reason? So it was very important for me to kind of get into this kind of a space where I could kind of get in touch with a lot of people and get feelers from there. How have they been over the past year? It's amazing. I think, Maya, you come across as the youngest on this panel today with the energy that you have kind of expressed.
It's a great thing, isn't it? We can do things for free and
Yeah.
still be exchanging ideas and
Yeah.
be across the world. Thommen is sitting in the east coast of, I mean, these are the great advantages of
Yeah.
being online.
Yeah.
True, for sure.
I want to just keep interjecting in terms of how much we have been challenged, and maybe sometimes we don't realize it. Firstly, Thoman, I must say that, when the lockdown happened, for me also it was slam. I was
Yeah.
performing on various stages before that. It was a kind of shock wave. But luckily, I didn't go through some heavy depression or anything. But, if we ask ourselves the kinds of contradictions that we have been living through second by second, if we were to simply document that, we would have a whole new way of looking at art and ourselves as artists. For instance, I am only realizing now that my first impulse as a performer was to erase the body. So the first thing I did without thinking was to pick up a mobile phone and start recording for 2 minutes like this. And then without any, it had burps and pops and whatnot, but I didn't neaten it up. I just posted it. And then that became a thing in itself. I knew at the back of my mind that I'm not going to post a single performance of mine because that is the most boring thing. How I knew it, I don't know. We carry memories of millennia, I suppose. We know things without knowing it. We knew that to watch a recorded performance online is the most boring thing. It can be the best of whatever theater from Globe to Kalidasa done in the most beautiful fashion, but it's rubbish because it's just documentation. And we are meant to see the live thing, and we are seeing some third rate documentation. So that doesn't work. So, what I'm saying is, here is a performer who erased herself. And it became only this some voice, somebody calling me up and saying, Maya, tumhara to comedy sunke, I want to do animation to it. So I said, come on, let's do it. So we would have day-long talks, and she keeps sending me little versions of her style of, and she knows nothing about videography. We are learning it together. The excitement of that is amazing. So all I'm saying is, you see, so Siddharth, I'm a person on my own, very much like you. I'm a community person in the sense of if I get a call, like has been happening since 2014, you get a call saying, "Kal aapko stage pe aana hai, and this is the masla, and please respond to it." Then myself as an artist, I start thinking as a person and a woman in this country, and I make something quickly, and I go to the street. And so that's how the public in me, sitting in me, or the community sense sitting in me gets stretched and pulled out. But left to myself, I'm an alone person. Now, what I'm asking you, Siddharth, is you who practices, I totally, I know what you're talking about. But if somebody like you see, when I look at Thommen, I am not thinking that he's going to call in an audience. I am missing the liveness of the making process. He will not call in an audience. We will all be sitting there as the contributors to making.
Yeah.
And how do we make for online, offline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we start making for something? Its first avatar will be online. And then in that little discussion, we'll say, oh, Manjari is already getting an idea for something that will zoom off in that direction. So that by December, if there's a lift up in the lockdown, she will go and do a 20-minute performance around this. And I'll tell you something, we must take away from lockdown this sense of nothing needs to be finished. We are all very practiced. Manjari is very practiced. We don't need those damn 2-month rehearsals. No, Manjari, what do you say?
Yeah.
She's smiling politely, but she knows. And we will then be in and out. I want to give you another idea because Thommen has a space, nothing like a physical space, Thommen. Maybe it needs to be Bangalore based to start with because there's a money issue. I don't mind spending my own money and coming to Bangalore if there's some exciting possibility that's going to get triggered off. I will come, and you will find some artists who will spend their money and come because people like Siddharth and me are teaching also. So there is some money coming in. So I will spend it because I want to see this happen. And if you get 3 or 4, there's Manjari sitting here, there's me, there's so many people in Bangalore.
Absolutely.
And You don't have to make a whole calendar. Let's do just a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
We brainstorm on Zoom. What is the rough structure of this? What is the rough aim of this? What is the rough, very loose, ambiguous outcome? But outcomes, I don't think, should be too phrased and framed
Right.
firmly. But we know, and then we ask each other, hey, listen, let me tell me a bit about where you're coming from, and then we meet there.
Yeah.
And we have enough warm-up time into it. I don't know, give it 4 or 5 days, give it a week. Maybe we have to spend a week there.
Yeah. For
And
sure.
there, Siddharth, how do you become a community person will be very different. So let's not define ourselves by the kind of person we've been, baggage that we carried.
Yeah.
Now it's about already we've got redefined in this 1.5 years.
Right.
So then how do we stretch that
Right.
to converse with each other and to get more meat out of it?
Wonderful. I mean, we're all in. I mean, I think Shoonya would be all in. As I said, we've had rehearsals so far. I mean, as soon as maybe May or June, as soon as the initial lockdown was done, the decision that we took is we're going to open up the space, and anyone can use it on a pay what you can and with no compulsions. So the idea being, this is the most that we can do right now for the artists, is just give the space. And as of now, that's the one thing that we have done and will continue to do. And so in terms of bringing in artists to use the space as much as they want to, as much as they need to, for something to emerge, for sure, we're very much, we'd love to do something like this. One of the things about Shoonya is that, as I said, we didn't have like a clear artistic director running the vision of the space as such. So a lot of our direction has come from the artist community, and it's kind of, even before pandemic, it was this Shoonya is a space. Artists, please kind of come and inhabit the space and create and give what you can to the world, kind of thing. So the hope is that it will continue to kind of be artist led, and so yeah, some of these kinds of exercises would be wonderful.
What is emerging from what Maya has been kind of now very forceful, if I can call that. This idea, I think, has captured Maya's mind now. It's not going to let go of her.
Thanks to you. I didn't have it earlier. I had it because you called for this conversation.
What emerges from this is, again, going back to the question of community, it's going to be a new kind of community, because you mentioned you were just about to break even after about 6 years of operation, and then this thing happened. This is going to be a new idea that you can float around. You already opened it up for rehearsals. It can still be that you use it for your creative pursuits and pay as you can, or whatever. There is a minimum. Those who can pay more can perhaps pay more. But this could be a new direction where you're saying that this is what the space is now. That it is now a space for a responsive, improvised performance, or creativity, or somatic practice, or whatever you want to call it. What we are going to miss out now is a defined use, that it is for workshop, or it is for rehearsal, or it is for play or production, this that it's that is not there. So you will have to kind of create this new opportunity, where you want to call it jamming, you want to call it improvisation, or whatever, but something of that kind. And it could be, let's say, it could be at some point, if Maya is traveling there, she anchors it. So it means kind of creating a network every time you travel, because the space is there, and this probably can be done in any number of cities. You travel there, you make yourself available. If you want to make yourself available, Thommen, I'm there, and let me know if something can be worked out. You float it out, the idea emerges, and happen from there.
I think in terms of the economy, like for performers and for spaces, the pandemic has been very different in the sense of how it's affected them. Not speaking of performers who had no access at all to online, internet, no nothing. And they were sort of left at a point where, and I think they continue to be at a point where neither has that bridge been made for them, because in some ways their traditional or folk forms of working are very difficult to adapt to a way of experiencing art. So of course it's affected them very differently. And of course, it's affected spaces, performance spaces, and workshop spaces such as Shoonya really differently. And in some ways, it's affected people like Maya and I entirely differently. Also, people, young performers who are just starting out in this medium. It's of course what Maya was talking about has allowed them that sort of thing of being able to improvise within this thing of Zoom, or bringing in other kinds of technology. In some ways, it made performance possible without us thinking about, oh my God, so now I have to hire an auditorium. Okay, now I have to sell so many tickets. Okay, now I have to make sure publicity goes out, da 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 da. All those things were just taken away. And in some ways, it made performance a lot easier for some of us. Definitely, I'm not trying to take away from the fact that I don't know how many of us really earn from online performances. I think that was really a negligible amount, that especially for young performers and emerging artists, it's anyway that earning is almost always zero, even if you're performing in an auditorium. In the best of sort of conditions, it's like a centrally located auditorium, and you've done your publicity and all of that. Even then, it's almost always like a break-even situation. But in some ways, it made it possible for people to not think so much about the costs of things. And I think it made people braver in their experimentation in some ways. The other thing that I wanted to say, as performers, this is not so much about performance, but the lives of performers. A lot of us, mainly identifying ourselves as performers, we went a lot into teaching. And a lot of the stuff that came up was also a lot of young people put together these jams, which Maya is referring to, that spirit of improvisation, and which are still happening and are very, very much alive. There are theatre companies I know which have just consistently done, like, every week they have one jam, and it's sort of this calibration of what community has happened, because in these jams there has been a really opening up. Okay, it's just a comedy improv jams, anybody can come, so you needn't have prior training. There is a sort of informality also in this medium. There's also many options of, I shut my video if I don't want to view it. And I think the other thing that really happened in a very visible way, at least I was really sort of impacted by it, is this thing of artists really reaching out for each other, which was this question of mental health and art that may or may not be actually exclusively to do with the pandemic, were raised. And I think that became a really important conversation for me, and continues to be. There are people who have not done anything through the pandemic, or barely any produced any work through the pandemic. Performers who I know, people who have not really wanted to step into the, just said, okay, this is not happening for me. I work in ensemble, I work with real bodies, I need to feel your skin, your presence, your breath. It's not, I don't feel it here in this medium, so I'm just going to wait it out, or I'm just going to take this time to really just introspect or whatever. And for them, I think it's kind of thing of, what is it now to be an artist when I'm not producing any work? Or am I still an artist? I went through this whole phase of, do I still want to be an artist? And if I'm not producing, I've not produced any work for so long, or jammed with another body, even if like that qualifies as being an artist for so many whatever months and months. What qualifies me to be an artist still? That is where this community sort of reaching out for each other and really checking up on each other, and consolidated effort of a lot of senior artists to set up these mental health circles as part of one which is called the Circle of Resilience. I'm super grateful to sort of such spaces where I was able to reach out to people, artists who were not artists I knew at all. And we were sometimes not even talking about making work, But indirectly, we were talking about that void of like just not being able to be in space with each other and, jam with each other, and what that meant for us. So there used to be a space called Gati in Delhi. That space got taken over by Ambedkar University for a course they were running. And subsequently, after they ran that course, a lot of people who were part of Gati, that collective, and others felt like this is a beautiful space which we have sort of nurtured and built over years. How can we just sort of let it go? But no one individual had the sort of finances to sort of pay the rent, which is pretty heavy. We got a bunch of people together, some 30 odd people together. Not all of us pay. Out of those 30, some people pay a certain small sum, which sort of adds up to the collective big sum that we need for rent. Over the last whatever year and a half, it has been this space wherein a few of us have just gone and sort of, okay, today we're just going to do some training together for no apparent reason, not towards a show we're building or whatever, but this sense of also meeting new artists who were part of that community and saying, oh, I've never really encountered your work, and or sort of just one Sunday just meeting to just play and have paratha afterwards. So it's that sort of really also shifted in my head what community means. Also the fact that it is located in Khidki village. We have been sort of giving it out to people other than the 30 who are involved in really nurturing that space. But also, how do we open it out to the community, the village, the people who live in Khidki?